Imagine spending 17 years in prison for a crime you did not commit, while the real attacker walks free. For nearly 2 decades, Andrew Malkinson insisted he was innocent. He lost his freedom, reputation, and years of his life. Many people stopped listening, but in 2023, everything changed. DNA evidence pointed to another man, Quinn, and the case became one of the most shocking miscarriages of justice in modern British history. Tonight, we're diving deep into the investigation, the wrongful conviction, the evidence that was missed, and the devastating consequences for everyone involved. This is the case of Andrew Malkinson. This video is intended for educational and documentary purposes. It discusses allegations of rape, violence, strangulation, and wrongful imprisonment, which some viewers may find distressing. All information is based on publicly available court proceedings, news reports, and official findings available at the time of the recording. Viewer discretion is advised. And if you are interested in true crime cases that focus on psychology, investigations, and miscarriages of justice, subscribe to the channel, like the video, turn on the notifications, and while you're watching, let me know in the comments, do you think the police became too focused on securing a conviction rather than finding the right suspect? In the early hours of 19th July 2003, a young mother was walking home through Little Hulton in Greater Manchester. What happened next was horrific. She was attacked, beaten, and bitten. The assault was so severe that her cheekbone was fractured. The attacker then strangled her unconscious before raping her. Investigators launched a major hunt for the man responsible. At the time, the public feared a dangerous predator was on the loose. Police quickly focused on a local security guard named Andrew Malkinson. During an identity parade, the victim identified him as the attacker. That identification would become the cornerstone of the prosecution case. But there was a problem. Malkinson maintained from the very beginning that he was innocent. He denied any involvement in the attack, yet in 2004, he was convicted and sent to prison. For the next 17 years, he would continue to insist that the police had arrested the wrong man. And while Malkinson sat behind bars, the real attacker remained unidentified. At least, that's what everyone believed. At the time, Malkinson was working as a security guard at a local shopping centre. He was not known as a violent offender. He had no connection to the victim, yet investigators believed he matched the description of the attacker. The key moment came during an identity parade. The victim identified Malkinson as the man who had attacked her. To detectives, the identification appeared decisive. To Malkinson, it was the beginning of a nightmare. In court, prosecutors relied heavily on the victim's identification. Malkinson insisted he had been mistaken for someone else. He repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime, but juries often place enormous weight on eyewitness testimony, especially when the witness is the victim of a traumatic attack. Year after year, he filed appeals. He challenged the conviction. He argued that the investigation had gone wrong, and year after year, the courts rejected his claims. His appeals in 2012 and 2020 both failed. Imagine what that does to a person psychologically, to know you are innocent, yet watch every legal challenge collapse, to remain in prison while the real perpetrator continues living freely. For Malkinson, those years lost could never be recovered. But behind the scenes, one piece of evidence refused to disappear: DNA. Biological material recovered from the victim had never matched Andrew. At the time of the original investigation, the fact did not prevent his conviction. Years later, advances in forensic technology would allow investigators to compare that DNA profile against the wider range of samples. And when they finally did, the results pointed to a completely different man. DNA matched Paul Quinn, a convicted sex offender who had lived in the same area while the attack took place. The entire case against Malkinson began to unravel. The man who had spent 17 years in prison was no longer the only suspect. He was becoming the victim of a miscarriage of justice. As detectives closed in on Quinn, they uncovered another detail that prosecutors would later present in court. Quinn had carried out internet searches about how long police retain DNA samples. To the prosecution, those searches suggest he was worried about forensic evidence linking him to the crime. For a jury, it was a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. During the trial, prosecutors described a horrifying sequence of events. The victim was walking home in the early hours of 19th July, 2003. Quinn allegedly attacked her from behind. He beat her so severely that her cheekbone was fractured. He bit her. He strangled her until she lost consciousness. And while she was unconscious, he raped her. These were injuries from which Andrew had spent 17 years in prison. Think about what this revelation meant for the victim. It meant learning that the man convicted of her attack was not the true offender. For Malkinson, confirmation that he had lost nearly 2 decades of his life because the investigation had failed. And for the public, it raised a deeply uncomfortable question. How could the real attacker remain free while an innocent man sat in prison? In 2025, a jury at Manchester Crown Court found Paul Quinn guilty of rape, strangulation, grievous bodily harm. After more than 20 years, the man responsible for the attack had finally been identified and convicted. But the story was far from over, because the conviction of Paul Quinn did not simply expose a rapist. It exposed one of the most serious failures of the criminal justice system in recent British history. After Quinn's conviction, Andrew Malkinson made a statement that was both powerful and deeply personal. He said, "The right result has finally been achieved for the victim, myself and the public." But he also accused investigators of pursuing the wrong man. He said they wanted a quick conviction, and I was a handsy-patsy. Those words captured the anger of a man who had spent 17 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. Critics of the original investigation argue that there were several chances to identify the real attacker much earlier. The DNA recovered from the victim did not match Malkinson, yet his conviction still went ahead. Wrongful convictions affect more than one person. The innocent defendant loses freedom, the victim is denied justice, and the real offender remains free. In this case, all three happened at the same time. For 17 years, the public believed the attacker had been locked away. In reality, a true perpetrator was still living outside of prison. In 2023, the Court of Appeal finally quashed Malkinson's conviction. The ruling cleared his name, but it could not return the years he had lost. By then, he was 60 years old. He had entered prison in his 40s and emerged almost 2 decades later into a completely different world. After his conviction was quashed in 2023, Andrew Malkinson became a prominent voice on miscarriages of justice. He has spoken publicly about the psychological impact of spending 17 years in prison while maintaining his innocence. Rather than disappearing from the public view, Malkinson has continued to campaign for accountability and reform. He has argued that failures in the case should be examined so that other innocent people do not suffer the same fate. For him, exoneration was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of rebuilding a life that had been interrupted for nearly 2 decades. The woman who was attacked in Little Hulton has remained largely out of the public eye. Her identity has been protected. What we do know is that she endured a brutal assault and later learnt that the originally convicted man had not been the true attacker. That revelation brought a different kind of trauma, the realization that the person responsible had not been brought to justice at the time. The conviction of Paul Quinn finally established who committed the crime, but no court verdict can erase what happened to her. This case is now studied as one of the most significant wrongful convictions in modern Britain. It highlights the dangers of relying too heavily on eyewitness identification, the importance of forensic evidence, and the consequences of investigative mistakes. But perhaps the most haunting question is not who committed the crime. We know the answer to that. The haunting question is, how many years could have been saved if the evidence had been followed up properly from the start? For Andrew Malkinson, the fight was never just about proving his innocence. It was about being believed. For the victim, it was finally about knowing the truth. And for the public, it was a reminder that justice is not about convicting someone. It is about convicting the right person. If you found this documentary informative, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe there should be stronger safeguards against wrongful convictions in the UK? And if you'd like more in-depth true crime documentaries focused on investigations, psychology, and miscarriages of justice, don't forget to subscribe. But sometimes the most disturbing crimes are not only the crimes themselves, but the failures that allow them to go unresolved for years. Until the next time, stay safe.